¿Qué tal? Buenos días. Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Juan Manuel Zendoya. Welcome to our Santander Financial City. Welcome to our headquarters. I think this video is an excellent starting point for this conference. As Mario Benedetti said in the video, even the questions we need to ask are changing. We are living in a times of great change, but there are things that are not changing. For example, what is not changing is that people want the governments and companies to act in a responsible way. What is not changing is that people want to feel part of the future and not be left behind. Thank you for coming, all the attendees, more than 600 attendees, ambassadors, policymakers, authorities, colleagues from the industry, politicians, public servants, members of the board. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We are hitting our records, 600, 700 attendees, and 40% of them from outside of Spain. Many of you have traveled a long way. Thank you. We are very grateful. I would like also to welcome our distinguished speakers, and especially to mention Fernando Henrique Cardoso, former President of Brazil, and Felipe González, former President of Spain, who masterminded the integration of Spain in the European Union. This conference is a tradition, has become a tradition, but always there is something new, and we have some surprise for this event. Last year, we asked for your feedback, and we received one very important one. You said that we needed to make this conference more open. That's why, for the first time, we are streaming this conference through our web that is Santander ICB, International Banking Conference.com. There will be no media here, no journalists are here, but remember, thousands of people are watching us throughout our web. Well, formally, I would like to finish by introducing the opening session of the conference with the participation of Ana Botín, Santander Executive Chairman. After Ana, we will have the pleasure of hearing Minister Nadia Calviño share her views on Spain, Europe, opportunities and challenges. Nadia Calviño was named Minister of Economy and Business in June, after a very successful career in the ministry. Now she is leading and in the European Commission, where she became the youngest Director General in the history of the European Commission. Congratulations, Minister. She has been a leader in the European competition policy, in the single market, and for more than 4 years, in the most important one, responsibility, because it's about numbers, in the EU's budget process. We are delighted to have the Minister here. Please, Ana.
Buenos días a todos y gracias por asistir a nuestra conferencia. Antes de empezar, me gustaría dar la bienvenida también personalmente a la ministra Nadia Calviño y gracias por estar aquí en nuestra apertura de la conferencia. Y dar la bienvenida también a algunas otras personas que nos acompañan hoy. Bernardo González Rosas, presidente de la Comisión Nacional Bancaria de Mercados de México, a Burkhard Balz, miembro del Consejo del Bundesbank, Roberto Viola y Daniel Calleja, de la Comisión Europea, a Hugh Van Steenis, Senior Advisor del Gobernador del Banco de Inglaterra, David Wright, Chair de Eurofee, y muchos otros distinguidos participantes que nos acompañan. I will now go to English, as this is the official language of the conference. So welcome everybody again, and thank you for joining us today. As you've seen in the title, this year we are going to discuss responsible banking in an age of disruption. And yes, we have talked about disruption and its drivers, smartphones and digital technologies, for years. It's a topic of every conference that we all attend. And yet this event feels important, even novel, and not another stale repeat of familiar themes. And that is because the future is not what it used to be. And it is fair to say, we've seen it in the video and we see it in the newspapers every day, that worrying economic, political, social events are taking place. And the fact is that the world is changing. It's changing not just faster, but in ways that we did not predict even a few years ago. We used to think that technology helped democratization. Wired magazine, even a few weeks ago, claimed that there is evidence that technology does the opposite, that the misuse of artificial intelligence, for example, is leading or could lead to centralization. As you know, in the past, Wired has evangelized techno-utopianism as much as anybody, and its patron saint was media theorist Marshall McLuhan. He is the one that coined the phrase the global village, la aldea global. Technology and the internet would usher in a new era of personal freedom, creativity, and growth. It would spell the end of large, controlling, top-down institutions. Well, today, these utopian visions seem at odds with reality and with our sense of what makes sense for a more inclusive society. Clearly, these were views of the world that were too simplistic. After the end of the Cold War, conventional wisdom had it that liberal democracy was destined to spread across the planet, and that digital technology would be the wind at its back. This was what was called by some the end of history. Today, a very different end seems to be on the cards. There is a lot of uncertainty, anxiety, anger about how the costs and benefits of today's dramatic changes are being shared, and with good cause. In a time of pessimism, however, those of us that believe that a better world is possible have a responsibility not just to make ourselves heard, but to act. And that brings me to those two words, responsible banking. Responsibility is the bedrock of trust. But today, the pressure to be responsible has never been greater. The Great Recession, globalization, digital technology, all this has created economic and social disruption. And meanwhile, consumers and citizens have more power than ever to mobilize and communicate. So what is our response? Santander response is to focus, you've seen it in the video, even more on two things. One is to be responsible towards the individuals with whom we interact, our teams, our customers, our shareholders, our communities, individual citizens. Making terms easier and simple to understand, being transparent on pricing and scope of services, treating them personally, being fair. As you've seen and heard many times from me, simple, personal, and fair are the three words that should distinguish Santander from other players. And that sums up how we at Santander aspire to operate. Get this right, and you build loyalty. Get it wrong, for example, if you lose customers' data or sell products irresponsibly, you lose loyalty in an instant. Tackling this challenge, which we call the challenge of the new business environment, is absolutely key. And second, there's our responsibility to society as a whole, how we use our financial capabilities to help address the big challenges that we face as a society. We can play a major role in helping ensure growth is both inclusive and sustainable. Inclusive, we mean by tackling financial exclusion, helping entrepreneurs start companies and create jobs, and of course helping people get the education and training they need through our universities program. Sustainable by financing renewables, supporting smart infrastructure, agrotech, green tech. Sustainable, of course, means also actively contributing to a more balanced and inclusive economic and social system. And by doing all of this, we fulfill our purpose, which is to help people and businesses from the microcredit needs of the smallest self-employed and individuals to the biggest corporations to help them prosper. And achieving this requires leadership to implement a strong culture robust governance, and clear metrics. Some of the topics that George Bridges will cover later on in his panel. And make no mistake, digital technology makes it possible for us to do everything I just said. It makes it possible for banks to achieve this mission of being more responsible in ways we could not just do a few years ago. Just as an example, Open Bank, our 100% digital bank, launched last week a robo-advisor service that allows people with very small amounts to get investment advice that was previously only available on a one-to-one basis to the very top end of our customer base. Brazil and Mexico have launched very important microcredit, microfinance programs with an uptake so large that, and a really big impact that our Brazilian operations, for example, have been recently recognized as an example by the United Nations. And of course, banks are no strangers to technology. Some of my peers say that we are now a technology company. Well, we have always been a technology company. Today, retail banks spend about 3 times as much on IT security, for example, as non-financial institutions of comparable size. Of course, the digital transformation that is happening today means that our customers have in their pockets, this has been said several times, but it's worth remembering, the equivalent of a 1995 supercomputer in their hands every day. This means they expect much more from all of us, and of course from the banks. Banks need to be safe, efficient, responsible, be able to offer personalized products and services, smart and relevant interactions, and to do so at the time that's most convenient to us, as consumers, and all of this at a low cost. And the list goes on. Therefore, the responsible bank of the 21st century must be at the cutting edge of technology to survive. No surprise then that both responsibility and technology are foundation stones of Santander's strategy, because our aim is to be the responsible and open digital platform for financial services. And this task of fostering responsible banking cannot be solved, however, just by us. It cannot be solved by a single bank. Culture develops out of norms, and norms are built on a foundation of rules and laws. And we are working with many others here in Spain and globally to drive this culture. Santander will be one of the signatories, by the way, to the new United Nations Principles on Responsible Banking. So all of that brings me to the subject of responsible regulation. We have a lot of regulators and supervisors here in the room today. We used to think that newborn companies would revolutionize the sector. Now, some of the so-called disruptors are the largest companies in the world. Silicon Valley is producing fewer startups than before. This is a fact. Many of them that survive and show promise are either bought and integrated into platforms, or some features are copied and the company effectively disappears. Disruption is not what it used to be. And the reason? Global platform companies. Companies that have become so big, they have become so big because digital enables economies of scale, the so-called network effects, because new users increase the value of the network, and because the importance of data, coupled with AI and machine learning, supercharges data's power. It is reported that one of the 5 largest technology companies collects enough data on a single average user to fill 23,000 A4 pages in 15 days. That's a lot of information. And these benefits compound with interest. The more data you gather, the better the systems you can build. And better systems allow you to collect more data. So why is this a business model we should all understand better? Let me share a story. Admiral is an insurance company in the UK, and it designed a system to analyze the data generated by users of one of these big global platforms with a very simple purpose: to offer a better price to some of its customers. Just 2 hours before the service was due to go live, this big platform company forced the insurance company to stop the launch. The reason was, the platform said, that protecting the privacy of its users was of the utmost importance. So far, so good. Except that 1 year later, this same platform company, we learned, was using its customers' data without permission. But even worse, if this platform was Santander, an admiral and aggregator of financial information, then under current European Union regulations, we could not say no. And that is because under European Union Payment Service Directive 2, so-called PSD2, there is an asymmetrical obligation for banks, if customers agree to it, to provide payment providers and aggregators data about customers. Yet even now, there is no reciprocal obligation for non-banks, including the global platforms, to share the customer data with third parties. In other words, non-banks enjoy a clear competitive advantage if they can combine a customer's banking data with the non-banking information they hold about the customer. There are other regulations that only apply to banks, but not to competitors who do the same activity. There are several European Union regulatory asymmetries related, for example, to independent financial advice, capital requirements, and, of course, fiscal laws. Just another example, under present regulation, the initial capital requirement for non-bank entities in the payments market, payments is the heart of a bank's business, as you know, is 50,000 euros. Banks are competing with startups, but also with global platforms in this payment business, with radically different rules on capital, on safety requirements, on compliance, or use of data. And just as with regulation, so with tax. We have 20th century tax laws for a digital age. And what is the result? An ever-increasing sector of the economy is not paying a fair share of tax. I'm quoting the Financial Times. Multinationals in general have perfected the art of locating, in terms of law and accounting, their tax bases in low-tax jurisdictions. But global digital businesses can produce their services in a single location and sell to the global market from one place with minimal local infrastructure. So you might ask yourselves, what does all that have to do with responsible banking, with responsibility in general? Well, it's clear that us businesses need to play our part, but we need also to rethink the role of both the private and the public sectors, the joint responsibility of all of us in the age of disruption. In fact, we need to decide what kind of an age of disruption we want to have. And very specifically, what is the governance we should have to counterbalance the concentration of power and the uneven distribution of benefits. We need to have clear and effective rules that assure us all, consumers and companies, that Europe, I'm speaking as a European, but obviously this applies to the world at large, that Europe really is a unique digital space and truly fosters innovation in which rights and obligations, as well as the unintended and external effects of the changes, are shared fairly. It is a fact that people assume that the rights, consumers and people assume that the rights are the same regardless of the channel or provider that they have chosen. This is what our customers think. But it is not what the law says. Legislation, be it consumer protection, fiscal, or regulatory, still turns its back on an obvious fact of this new economy. The borders between sectors and markets have been diluted. And faced with this irrefutable evidence, what we need is for the laws and regulations to be neutral and to treat companies in the same way when they do the same kind of business, regardless of the sector to which they are normally assigned by research analysts or others. We need rules that foster real disruptive innovation, and that requires, amongst other things, understanding monopolistic business models. The classic consequence of insufficient competition is the extraction of economic rent. So maybe the answer is to go back to the roots of competition law. The control of critical infrastructures today relate, for example, to data, but technologies gives these platforms access to people's lives and a near unassailable position, a position that is not sustainable if we really want a fair and innovative digital society. And the best guarantee for the innovation that promotes competition, sustainable growth, and welfare for the majority is to regulate businesses on the basis of what businesses do, not who they are, and ensure transparency and vibrant competition so that society as a whole benefits. And this, of course, includes data regulation to make sure that companies use data responsibly, because the right to security and privacy of data is a fundamental right in the new digital society. There is also growing literature that argues that global platforms have become so fundamental to our lives that should any of them suddenly collapse, it could have systemic consequences. And might I add that this is even if they're not involved in providing financial services. Finally, we need laws that ensure everybody pays their fair share in tax so that each and every business, irrespective of our zip code, industry code, contribute proportionally and where the profit is made to the overall social needs of our societies, so we can, in a proportionate way, all businesses, whether digital or traditional, strengthen the institutions of government that we depend upon. So in summary, these four aspects: responsible business, fair competition and regulation, the right to privacy and fair taxation, should be indispensable elements of any European strategy. The bugs in the rules of the pre-digital world are not susceptible to being patched. What is required for inclusive and sustainable growth, fairness, and innovation in this new era is that we rethink the very operating system of our societies, which necessarily includes laws and regulation. And having new rules that reconcile the digital society with our traditional values of cohesion, solidarity, and progress is both important and urgent. It is a conversation that companies, authorities, academia, all social agents cannot continue postponing. And I invite all of you to join this conversation. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to be here to address the opening session of the prestigious event, this very prestigious event. After 11 years, this conference has become a reference for the financial sector, as the audience here shows today. And let me start by thanking Santander and its chairman, its executive chairwoman, Ana Botín, for their very kind invitation. I would like to start by saying how appropriate I find the subject of this year's conference. I find it particularly appropriate, thought-provoking, and the title really resonates with me. Responsible banking in an age of disruption. We are indeed in an age of disruption, and it is of the utmost importance, and this will be the key message that I want to leave with you today, that the banking sector, but also political and business leaders, we all social and economic actors, seize the opportunities that are brought about by this disruption, but also act responsibly to face the challenges which are ahead of us. Before getting down to the main topic of the conference, I will briefly depict the current situation, both from a global and a European point of view, and move on to the Spanish economy and the economic agenda pursued by the government to responsibly embrace this age of disruption. Allow me to continue in Spanish. Como todos ustedes saben, la economía global continúa en una fase de expansión. Las previsiones más recientes apuntan a un ritmo ligeramente inferior al previsto en la primavera pasada, pero un crecimiento que continúa siendo vigoroso. Y lo mismo puede decirse de la zona euro, con unas previsiones de crecimiento que se sitúan entre el 2% en 2018 y el 1,8% en 2019, según el Banco Central Europeo, por encima de la tasa de crecimiento potencial a largo plazo de la economía europea. Y aunque esto significa un ritmo de crecimiento inferior al de 2017, que fue un año excepcionalmente bueno, es destacable que haya crecimiento económico en todos los Estados miembros y que esto se esté apoyando principalmente por la buena marcha de las inversiones y del consumo privado. Tras 20 trimestres consecutivos de avance del PIB, la actual moderación refleja el proceso natural de convergencia hacia la tasa de crecimiento potencial que se produce después de un periodo expansivo. Y, en cualquier caso, hay que tener en mente que tanto la economía mundial como la europea se enfrentan en el medio plazo a varias fuentes de incertidumbre. La caída de la confianza por el giro proteccionista en determinados países, la evolución de los precios del petróleo, las políticas monetarias menos acomodaticias que en los últimos años, las posibles tensiones financieras en un contexto de excesivo endeudamiento de algunas economías emergentes y, por supuesto, no podemos olvidar, en relación con las economías europeas, el impacto que tendrá el proceso de salida del Reino Unido de la Unión Europea. Pasando al contexto español, nuestro país creció en el tercer trimestre de este año un 0,6%, una tasa similar a la de los 2 trimestres anteriores, con la demanda nacional como principal motor. Y en este ámbito cabe destacar también el buen comportamiento de la inversión, que en el tercer trimestre creció a tasas superiores al 6%. Esta misma semana hemos conocido los datos de afiliaciones a la Seguridad Social y paro registrado de octubre, muy positivas, y otros datos que han llevado a la Autoridad Independiente de Responsabilidad Fiscal esta misma semana también a revisar al alza sus expectativas de crecimiento para este trimestre, este último trimestre de 2018 y los próximos. Estos datos positivos están en línea con la previsión del Gobierno de que España seguirá creciendo a tasas robustas, un 2,6% este año, un 2,3% el año próximo, con un diferencial positivo, es decir, por encima de la media de la Unión Europea, de la zona euro y de las principales economías de nuestro entorno. Además, nuestra previsión es que nuestra economía continuará registrando capacidad de financiación con respecto al resto del mundo y nuestro mercado laboral mantendrá su evolución positiva, de forma que la tasa de paro se sitúe en el año próximo por debajo del 14%. Se trata de unas previsiones prudentes que están en línea con el consenso nacional e internacional y que son consistentes con la maduración del ciclo a la que me he referido hace un momento. Es decir, que los datos económicos nos permiten ser optimistas sobre el futuro de nuestro país, pero que también nos exigen ser responsables para tomar todas las medidas oportunas que mantengan esta senda de crecimiento económico y sienten las bases de un crecimiento sostenible en el medio y largo plazo. Y subrayo esta palabra, responsable, porque es la clave de toda nuestra actuación. Necesitamos responsabilidad para seguir trabajando en superar los desequilibrios que aún padecemos, responsabilidad para empezar a pensar en el largo plazo y tomar medidas que conviertan los retos del mañana en oportunidades hoy, y responsabilidad para hacerlo cumpliendo con los ciudadanos, a la vez que respetamos la disciplina fiscal y garantizamos la sostenibilidad presupuestaria. Comienzo por este último punto, el de la responsabilidad fiscal, porque para este Gobierno la disciplina presupuestaria, honrar nuestros compromisos europeos, es un principio básico que vertebra todas nuestras actuaciones. De ahí que nuestro planteamiento es lograr un objetivo de déficit para 2019 del 1,8% del PIB, que supone una reducción de 0,9 puntos con respecto al déficit previsto para este ejercicio. Es decir, que mantenemos un esfuerzo de reducción del déficit similar al que se había venido previendo, pero partiendo de un dato veraz, un dato más realista con respecto al cierre de 2018, un ejercicio de realismo y responsabilidad. Además, este objetivo de déficit conlleva un esfuerzo de ajuste estructural de 0,4 puntos porcentuales, lo que nos permite cumplir nuestras obligaciones con el Pacto de Estabilidad y Crecimiento Europeo una vez que salgamos la primavera próxima del brazo correctivo de este Pacto de Estabilidad y Crecimiento y sin poner en riesgo el crecimiento económico y la creación de empleo. Y mediante la moderación del gasto y un aumento de los ingresos, vamos a poner en marcha una modernización del sistema tributario, como se acaba de señalar, para paulatinamente alinearlo con la realidad del siglo XXI y hacerlo al mismo tiempo más progresivo y más justo. Como saben, esta propuesta de reforma fiscal incluye la creación de un nuevo impuesto sobre determinados servicios digitales que está actualmente en fase de audiencia pública y que espero sea enviado al Congreso en las próximas semanas. Por primera vez, desde hace años, el Gobierno está proponiendo una senda de consolidación fiscal que no fía el ajuste presupuestario solo a la buena marcha del ciclo económico, sino que quiere utilizar de forma activa las herramientas de política fiscal para conseguir sanear nuestras cuentas públicas de forma sostenible. Así, en 2019 prevemos por primera vez, desde hace años, tener un superávit primario del PIB que nos permita acelerar el ritmo de reducción de la deuda pública, pasando de un 98,1% del PIB que teníamos a final del año pasado al 95,5% del PIB el año próximo, duplicando el ritmo de reducción de la deuda pública con respecto a los 3 ejercicios anteriores, dado que el elevado ratio de deuda pública sobre el PIB es uno de los principales desequilibrios y vulnerabilidades que hemos heredado de la crisis. Y reducirla es fundamental para tener el espacio para poder hacer frente a posibles problemas en el futuro y para poder liberar recursos ya que puedan ser dedicados a inversión productiva en lugar de estar dedicados al servicio de la deuda. La segunda clave de nuestra política económica se orienta a actuar de forma responsable hacia nuestros ciudadanos, que esperan de sus gobernantes propuestas para superar problemas como la precariedad laboral, el incremento de la pobreza y la desigualdad o las brechas sociales. Y estos objetivos explican las medidas que estamos adoptando desde que asumimos el Gobierno, como el Plan de Choque contra la Pobreza Infantil o las que están recogidas en el Plan Presupuestario para 2019. Permítame destacar medidas como el aumento de las becas, las mejoras de las ayudas a la dependencia, la recuperación de la cotización a la Seguridad Social para los cuidadores no profesionales, el incremento de las prestaciones por hijo a cargo o el aumento del salario mínimo interprofesional. Todas ellas son medidas que, además de un impacto social, tienen también un impacto de género, que a la postre redunda en beneficios económicos, porque la diferencia entre hombres y mujeres tiene claras consecuencias económicas. La menor participación de la mujer en el mercado de trabajo incide de forma directa en nuestra tasa de crecimiento potencial, de modo que, según algunos estudios, cerrar esta brecha, la brecha de género, podría incrementar nuestro PIB per cápita hasta en un 17%. Lo mismo se puede decir de la lucha contra la desigualdad y la pobreza, que son fenómenos que lastran nuestro crecimiento potencial. Así que, más allá de las razones de justicia social, actuar para incrementar la cohesión es primordial desde un punto de vista de responsabilidad económica y política, ya que las desigualdades son el caldo de cultivo perfecto para los populismos y los extremismos. Y el vídeo que hemos visto esta mañana es una buena ilustración de este punto que me gustaría señalar hoy aquí. El tercer vector en el que tenemos que actuar con responsabilidad es, como les decía, el largo plazo. España, como el resto del mundo, se enfrenta en los próximos años a retos de calado y no fácil solución, como el reto demográfico, el cambio climático, la transición energética o la revolución digital. Teniendo en mente todos estos desafíos, pero también problemas actuales como el paro, la baja productividad, la necesidad de impulsar nuestro crecimiento potencial, este Gobierno está trabajando en una agenda del cambio para construir un nuevo modelo productivo, más moderno, más justo, más sostenible ecológica y socialmente, y que apueste por la innovación y los cambios tecnológicos. Esta agenda, que tiene varios ejes y que actúa en ámbitos como mejorar la eficiencia del mercado laboral, combatir el cambio climático, vertebrar los territorios y fomentar la igualdad de oportunidades entre las personas, mejorar la eficiencia de la Administración. Tiene dos aspectos que me gustaría mencionar brevemente hoy aquí, que son la potenciación del capital humano y el aumento de la productividad mediante el capital tecnológico. En relación con el capital humano, que creo que de manera cada vez más clara es la clave de la riqueza de las naciones y de su bienestar, este Gobierno está absolutamente decidido a hacer lo posible por mejorar el sistema educativo y formativo, para que los jóvenes consigan las habilidades necesarias para moverse en un entorno laboral muy digitalizado, muy cambiante. No podemos olvidar que la tasa de paro juvenil en nuestro país roza todavía el 35% y que muchas de las habilidades de nuestros jóvenes no se corresponden con lo que se demanda en el mercado laboral. Esto supone un despilfarro enorme en términos de recursos públicos y privados. También estamos trabajando para garantizar que la formación no termina una vez que se accede al mercado de trabajo, sino que continúa a lo largo de toda la vida laboral. Y todo ello sin perder de vista la necesidad de adecuar la formación a lo que demandan las empresas, que a veces tienen dificultades para encontrar los perfiles que necesitan. Y todo ello requiere un mercado laboral más estable, en el que los puestos de trabajo que se creen sean de calidad, para que los empresarios y los trabajadores tengan incentivos para invertir en el capital humano, a sabiendas de que esta medida será clave para su éxito futuro. En cuanto al capital tecnológico, el Gobierno, un tema sobre el que estoy segura se va a hablar muchísimo a lo largo de toda la jornada de hoy, el Gobierno está poniendo en marcha medidas para adaptar nuestras estructuras económicas y sociales al nuevo paradigma digital. Hablo del impulso a la construcción de infraestructuras para el despliegue de las redes 5G, con el compromiso de garantizar la cobertura de más de 30 megabits por segundo a todos los ciudadanos del país y la cobertura de redes ultrarrápidas en todas las escuelas. La conectividad es clave para el éxito económico, pero también para garantizar la cohesión territorial y social. También hablo del fomento a las habilidades digitales y el apoyo al emprendimiento y a la digitalización de nuestras empresas, particularmente las más pequeñas, que suelen tener mayores dificultades de adaptación. Y por eso, entre las iniciativas que se van a incluir en la Agenda del Cambio, está la Estrategia España Nación Emprendedora para generar un entorno propicio y apoyar, en la medida de lo posible, la creación y el desarrollo del emprendimiento tecnológico, que es la palanca básica para la modernización de nuestro sector productivo. La velocidad a la que la revolución tecnológica está desplegando sus efectos es tal que plantea un serio reto de adaptación para todas nuestras estructuras económicas, sociales y políticas. Este es un tema que ya se ha mencionado y que estoy segura que también se hablará en la jornada de hoy. Y, por tanto, demorarnos en el proceso no hará sino dificultarlo aún más. Pero lo urgente no debe hacernos perder de vista lo importante. Y es que la transición no puede hacerse de cualquier manera. Es fundamental asegurarnos de que las personas más vulnerables, las empresas más pequeñas, no se quedan atrás. Y tenemos que cerciorarnos de que el cambio se produce con responsabilidad y con la máxima garantía de los derechos de los ciudadanos, de nuestros derechos como trabajadores, como votantes, como ciudadanos en su conjunto. En este punto, y antes de concluir, me gustaría referirme especialmente al sector financiero, que tras unos años de importantes esfuerzos para reestructurarlo y sanearlo, ahora debe afrontar el nuevo desafío de su adaptación al nuevo entorno digital y también ser consciente de su responsabilidad con la sociedad de cara al futuro. Por eso me parece tan apropiado el título de la conferencia. Las nuevas tecnologías digitales, como todos ustedes saben perfectamente, están impactando en la industria bancaria de manera diferencial. La presidenta Botín se ha referido a esto de forma amplia y en este ámbito, más que una transformación, lo que se está produciendo es una revolución con otro tipo de mercado, otros proveedores, otra forma de relacionarse con los clientes, otros retos desde la perspectiva de la competencia. Toda esta revolución conlleva importantes costes de adaptación tecnológica, retos en materia de seguridad, protección de datos, por parte también de las autoridades regulatorias y las autoridades de competencia. Y sé bien que el mundo financiero tiene clara la necesidad de aprovechar estas oportunidades y desarrollar nuestras nuevas ofertas que también favorezcan la inclusión financiera. El punto de partida de las entidades españolas es positivo, ya que se encuentran entre las más digitalizadas del mundo y, en este sentido, el nuevo entorno digital ofrece una oportunidad fundamental para que las entidades financieras promuevan un sistema inclusivo, sostenible y responsable con sus clientes y con toda la sociedad. Y el Gobierno está decidido a acompañar este proceso. Por ejemplo, hemos estado trabajando y sacado a consulta y terminando de evaluar las respuestas de una experiencia de sandbox, un espacio de pruebas, un arenero, que se llama así, el sandbox, para que podamos ver cómo introducir estos nuevos servicios, esas nuevas actividades de fintech, que las empresas puedan desarrollar estos nuevos proyectos digitales, pero en un entorno seguro desde la perspectiva de los reguladores, desde la perspectiva de la supervisión, desde la perspectiva de la protección de los intereses de los ciudadanos. Porque hay que encontrar el deseable equilibrio entre la experimentación, la innovación, el emprendimiento y las herramientas tradicionales de control, supervisión y regulación. En esta misma línea, también estamos trabajando en la creación de una autoridad macroprudencial que se encargue del objetivo primordial de tener una visión global sobre los desarrollos que se están produciendo en los diferentes mercados. Los trabajos avanzan a buen ritmo y espero poder sacar en los próximos días a audiencia pública o consulta pública un primer texto normativo para que lo adoptemos lo antes posible y sea un texto que además esté consensuado con los principales actores involucrados en la supervisión financiera, el Banco de España y la Comisión Nacional del Mercado de Valores. Y en la misma línea de garantizar el mejor funcionamiento del sector financiero, estamos impulsando desde el primer momento, desde que llegamos al Gobierno, la transposición de las directivas que estaban pendientes en nuestro país, muchas de las cuales aumentan la transparencia y la seguridad de los usuarios y consumidores de productos y servicios financieros. Y quiero insistir mucho en este punto. Necesitamos garantizar la transparencia y la seguridad de los usuarios de servicios financieros, porque el sistema solo puede funcionar bien si hay confianza. Como se ha señalado ya esta mañana, la responsabilidad es la base de la confianza y, por eso, reforzar los mecanismos de protección, que es el objetivo de nuestro Gobierno, beneficia a los consumidores, beneficia a las entidades financieras, nos beneficia a todos. Y este es el caso, por citar un ejemplo concreto, de la Ley de Crédito Inmobiliario, que está actualmente en tramitación en el Congreso de los Diputados, que esperamos pueda quedar aprobada a la mayor brevedad posible, puesto que estamos sujetos a un procedimiento sancionador con las instituciones comunitarias. Una ley, una norma que no solo protege a los consumidores, sino también a las propias entidades, al establecer un marco jurídico claro y estable que dé seguridad a todos. Porque la seguridad jurídica es muy importante para los ciudadanos y empresas, pero sobre todo es un factor clave para el buen funcionamiento de cualquier ámbito económico. Y este Gobierno está determinado a hacer todo lo posible por garantizarla. Hoy, más que nunca, este es un Gobierno que escucha, que reflexiona y que tomará medidas, actuará para resolver los problemas reales de nuestra sociedad. Un último eje que me gustaría mencionar, clave para el futuro, para nuestra estabilidad y prosperidad, es impulsar la profundización de la Unión Económica y Monetaria. Esta misma semana hemos tenido reuniones importantes en el Eurogrupo, en el ECOFIN, para trabajar, para avanzar en la creación de herramientas comunes que nos permitan prevenir nuevas crisis o, en caso de que se produzcan, actuar ante sus efectos lo más rápidamente posible. Y en eso estamos trabajando. Actualmente se están produciendo debates intensos, de gran importancia, sobre la creación de un respaldo fiscal para el mecanismo único de resolución, la conocida como backstop, también red de seguridad, la reforma del mecanismo europeo de estabilidad, la finalización de la unión bancaria con la creación de un esquema europeo de garantía de depósitos o la puesta en marcha de instrumentos de estabilización, como, por ejemplo, y esto es lo que impulsa España, un Fondo Europeo de Desempleo. Porque también desde el ámbito europeo debemos trabajar con responsabilidad y ser conscientes de que, del mismo modo que en un momento de grave dificultad se construyó una red de seguridad para el sistema financiero, es necesario crear una red de seguridad para los ciudadanos, lo que llamamos backstop for the people. Todo ello sin menospreciar el gran camino que hemos recorrido en estos últimos 10 años, en los que hemos sido capaces de avanzar mucho en el perfeccionamiento de la zona euro y en los que nuestra economía, la economía española, también ha avanzado de forma significativa. Por ejemplo, el sector financiero ha pasado por una importante reestructuración y saneamiento y contribuye hoy a financiar empresas y ciudadanos. No es sorprendente que las grandes entidades financieras españolas hayan salido reforzadas de los test de estrés que acaba de conducir la Autoridad Bancaria Europea, en los que se ha mostrado su notable grado de resistencia. Y este crecimiento económico está siendo compatible con un importante proceso de desapalancamiento del sector privado, una diversificación de las fuentes de financiación de nuestra economía, un incremento de la proporción del crédito que lleva a actividades productivas y una contribución positiva del sector exterior. La transformación de nuestro déficit por cuenta corriente en un superávit sostenido, incluso en esta fase de recuperación y de incremento de las importaciones, es el cambio más destacable que ha tenido nuestra economía desde la crisis. Hemos avanzado casi 20 puntos desde que en 2009 tocamos el mínimo de apertura de nuestra economía. Nos encontramos en este momento, el año pasado cerramos en el punto máximo desde el inicio del siglo, un 65,7% del PIB de exportaciones e importaciones, y este impresionante salto demuestra el gran esfuerzo de internacionalización que han hecho nuestras empresas, que hoy exportan más que nunca antes en nuestra historia. Nuestra economía es más abierta y esta es una de las claves del crecimiento económico, pero, naturalmente, también es un elemento que nos expone más a la influencia de desarrollos y acontecimientos externos sobre los que nuestra capacidad de influencia es, seamos honestos, limitada. Por eso es imprescindible aprovechar la buena marcha de la economía para adoptar las medidas y reformas necesarias y es imprescindible actuar con prudencia y responsabilidad. Porque actuar de manera responsable, sea desde la política o desde el mundo de la empresa, significa poner en el centro de nuestras preocupaciones a los ciudadanos. En momentos de grandes cambios, de disrupciones profundas de los modelos por los que nos hemos venido rigiendo durante décadas, es todavía más importante no perder de vista este principio. Al final, la verdadera responsabilidad en la gestión se plasmará en la medida en que las medidas que tomemos sean sostenibles en el tiempo, tanto económica y financieramente como socialmente y medioambientalmente. Ese es nuestro objetivo y en eso trabajamos. So without further ado, I want to thank once again the Santander Group and their invitation and wish you all a very fruitful and productive conference. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, ministra. Es un honor tenerte aquí hoy. Good morning, and once again, welcome. It is really great to see many of you again, and some of you for the first time. We're very happy to have you here. This is becoming a tradition, as Manolo said. And as you also heard, we always have innovations, and I want to mention another one. Not only we have opened it up to web stream, but we also have to explain the role of tortoise. What does an animal that lives in a shell have to do with responsible banking? Well, Tortoise is a company founded by James Harding, former head of BBC News and the Times of London, who decided that sometimes it's best to slow down and think more. And that is what Tortoise aims to do. James will lead some of the sessions today, and he will also provide a summary and conclusions of our debates at the end of the day. You may have seen a booklet that they have prepared also at the entrance. It has some very interesting data and facts that provide critical and provocative points about what banks and banking are doing. And before I give the floor to James, I want to do one more thing, which is to try the app. So I would ask you to please have your apps ready, if you can. I hope you have downloaded it and you have registered, and you have to go into the app right now to answer a question. I have actually borrowed from James. He allowed me to borrow a question from his, which I think will allow us to start the next debate with an interesting information. So please have your apps ready. I will ask you, which will be more responsible custodians of customers' data? Tech companies or banks? Have you found that question in the app, I hope? Tech companies or banks, please vote. And hopefully we'll be able to see the results. This was not prepared, by the way. This is very democratic. You're all voting. Hopefully, maybe we will see a disruptor say something different, but apparently not. So certainly this is a good place to start the next panel, which is called Building Trust in an Age of Disruption. Please, James. Thank you.
Alejandro, thank you very much. Now, there are one of two things that might have happened there. Either everybody thinks the same thing, unlikely, or possibly not quite enough of you have yet downloaded the app. So while I say a few words of introduction, please do download it, because I hope what you're going to find today is that, as well as trying to open things up in terms of streaming what happens at the Santander International Banking Conference, what we're really interested to do is opening things up in terms of how we hear what you think. That we're trying to make, as far as it's possible, in a room of this size and with a gathering of this scale, to make it an exercise in organized listening, to try and hear as much as possible from everyone in the room, during the sessions, in the breaks, over lunch, and that we try to use that so that altogether we come at the end of it to a better informed point of view. Alejandro, thank you for the introduction. I should just say, if you want to know what an example of a small business that has the backing of a big bank looks like, we're it. It is an extraordinary thing when you start a new enterprise and you start out as an entrepreneur to have the intelligent and respectful support of a great organization like Santander, and we are very proud that they are a founding partner of Tortoise. The reason that we tried to set up a new and different kind of news business was perhaps best demonstrated by the film that you saw right at the beginning of our day. I hope that gave a sense of what so many of us are feeling, this sense that we are overwhelmed by the daily noise of the news, and that increasingly people feel locked out of the decision-making that sets the rules for the 21st century. And so it's in that spirit that the subject of responsible banking in an age of disruption has been chosen, and why we have set out to have, I hope, a lively discussion through the course of the day, but most importantly, that it lives on beyond just the room here and beyond just this meeting today. That's why we're filming it. It's why, as Alejandro said, we tried to produce at Tortoise a set of notes that, if you like, frame the conversation we're going to have through a course of sessions today, provide some facts, spot some trends, try and highlight some of the most provocative thinking around these issues, and in what I think is a particularly sweet touch in the way in which we journalists think of people who work in banking and finance. There's plenty of room not only for notes at the back of this, but as you may have discovered, out of respect for bankers, also spaces for calculations. So if you feel a sudden urge to have a calculation, there's room for that too. And I hope you won't mind that we designed it specifically with a nod to something that's not modern, that's not technological, but looks suspiciously like a checkbook. So do use it as much as you can. The idea of organized listening is, of course, one that has great resonance at a time when it feels as though societies everywhere are polarized, and where the value of civilized disagreement is more important than possibly at any other time. And so, in a very practical way, the way in which we want to try and make sure that as many people as possible get heard today is via the app. So please download it. Through the course of the panel discussion that I'm about to have, there's room for questions. The fairest way to make sure that we get questions is via the app. Please please do so, and I'll pick up your questions off the iPad. In addition to that, my colleague, Paul Caruana Galizia, may collar you in the corridors, in the breakout sessions or in the breaks to the sessions later today. Please do speak to him. We're going to, at the end of all of this, pull together the most memorable moments and try and put together a film that captures as many views and as many points as possible. And at the end of the day, as Alejandro said, I'll try and produce some kind of point of view informed by the things that we've heard. Now let's have another go. Let's see if we can break the extraordinary and unusual consensus. I wanted to ask another question. So the question that we've got is whether or not in 10 years' time the biggest bank will be a technology company. So I don't know whether we can get it up. No, I'm being prompted that we probably can't. So I'm going to skip that. We're going to come back to it later on because we've got lots of time for it. Let's get stuck into the discussion. It seems to me that on the back of the speech we heard from Anna Botin, on the back of what we heard from the finance minister, that we are engaging in not just one of the biggest issues for banking, but for business in general. The twin questions of responsibility and of technology. And because the subject is quite so wide and quite so deep, what we're going to try and do over the course of just less than an hour is look at it in three ways. One of it is about the relationship between responsibility and technology, and the question that both Anna and the finance minister touched upon, which is the issue of the level playing field. The second element we're going to try and look at is the question of a bank's responsibility to the economy, and in particular with a view to the issue of inclusion. And the third area we're going to look at is the question of responsibility as regards social leadership, how banks can and do set values and culture more broadly in business and society. And we have, I am very happy to say, an extraordinarily stellar cast of people throughout the whole day, but starting with the discussion we're about to have. And I'd like to introduce them and invite them to come and join me up on the stage, if you will. Jimmy Wales is the founder of Wikipedia, the greatest act of human collaboration since the pyramids, and frankly, a lot more useful. Jimmy, please come up and join us. Imran Ghulam Hussain Walla has, without question, one of the worst job titles and yet one of the most interesting and important jobs in finance in Europe. He is the trustee, or and I hope I get this right, Imran, the open banking implementation entity, which actually means that open banking and the applications that are going to underpin it are overseen by Imran. Open banking, potentially a forerunner to the opening of a huge swathe of businesses, is going to be the driver of fintech and the driver of innovation and competition in the financial services industry in the UK, and as a prototype, no doubt, for much of what happens across Europe too. John Hope Bryant, if you read his CV, says many things, and he has a great number of titles, but the truth is he is basically inspirational. He is a person who inspires individuals to turn their financial lives around. He's a person who inspires entrepreneurs to give it a go, and as I hope you'll hear, he's a person who has inspired some of the greatest financial institutions in the world to embrace the issue of inclusion. He is the founder of Operation Hope. It is the largest non-profit provider of financial inclusion, tools and services in the United States. John Hope, please come up and join us. And this is the fun bit. I also get to introduce Anna Botin. Anna Botin is the Chairman and Chief Executive of Santander, the driving force of technology in this bank, and I think you'll have found the voice of values. Please join us. Anna, you know what would be great? Let's start off. It seems to me as though one of the key themes in your speech was this idea of asymmetrical obligations. And that touches the issue of banking and tech quite directly. And it's particularly live today that if you read the papers this morning, one of the key issues is the question of taxation of the big Silicon Valley companies. What do you think of this? The UK just announced that they are going to look at a digital tax. It looks as though Europe is struggling to get that tax to work. Do you think the right thing to do is to try and impose, whether it's a 3% tax or a £400 million tax, on the likes of Google, Facebook, and the others?
Well, I think I made it clear in my speech, but apparently I didn't.
Not enough.
Because you're asking me
Not
again,
listening closely enough.
I always say that women, men don't listen to women. Sorry,
we'll
guys.
get to that.
Sorry.
We'll get to that too.
Okay, so let me say it very clearly. I am not in favor of a digital tax. This is a term that I think is wrong. What I'm in favor is that a company that provides payments in Spain and makes a profit on payments in Spain pays the same tax as any other company, whether they call them a bank or it's called X or Y, Z. That is what I'm saying. And it's not just about the tax, as I said. It's about security. It's about compliance. And I think the business models have evolved, and the rules and regulations need to evolve. I'd rather say not just evolve, but need to be rethought fundamentally. And now, having said this, this is going on for years and years. And so, I always give the example. I have a friend who has a small business here in Spain. He provides medical services. And he was talking to me and saying, look, my small company makes a few thousand a month. It happens that I need to pay to the platform, I will not say the name, that controls 97% of digital advertising in Spain, 97%. I pay them $1,000 a month just to get customers come to my company. And that same platform pays very close to zero tax in Spain. Obviously, if you do digital advertising, you should pay taxes on your profits on digital advertising. But it's the same if you sell, cars, or if you're if you're providing a taxi service. It's a bit being fair. And if you're doing an activity that is X, you should be treated in the same way as anybody else who does that same activity.
And I think I understand that. I think lots of people understand that. But you take a position of principle, which is that all people should be taxed by a level playing field on rules. Everyone, I think, understands that. But the practical consequence of that is that for a long time now, and by the sounds of things, for a long time to come, big, huge companies are paying a fraction of tax that companies that are born and grown up in Europe are paying. And by taking the position that you're taking, that's likely to continue.
Look, 28 countries in Europe are not going to agree on what fair taxation system looks like in the 21st century. And I quoted the Financial Times, which is a very serious newspaper, I believe. And the Financial Times says, and it's true, that multinationals have always been, and that's why I started by saying multinationals in general have always been very good at putting their headquarters where they pay less taxes. And every taxation fiscal authority in the world is always asking us, is there a fair transfer pricing? Is there a fair charging for services that you provide from Spain to the United Kingdom? And we do our work, and we try to, if I'm producing a good or service in the United Kingdom, I try to assign the fair cost, and I come to a fair profit, and when I make a profit in the UK, I get taxed at 30%. This is not happening for many digital companies, because now it's even easier to say, I'm going to be, by the way, this happens across Europe. There's a few countries in Europe that have headquarters that then sell to all of Europe, and this is not fair between European countries. It's not a digital, it's wrong. We need to find, and media loves you, ex-media, so maybe you can help us. How do you call this in a way that it's not about taxing digital activities? Because I do a lot of digital activities, and I pay a lot of tax on those digital activities. So we need to get rid of this, and maybe the panel can help us to have a fair taxation system. It's a very obvious thing.
So,
it's not anti-anybody. It's for society and for justice.
I get that, but can I just understand? You just said, so a bank like Santander pays 30% tax.
36% effective tax rate.
36%. So is your objection to the idea of a 3% tax rate, as has been discussed at the European level, is the objection partly principled, but also just partly practical, that you think that gets the big platforms off the hook?
Look, I don't know. I haven't done enough work, and maybe we should do, but I think this is up to governments, but we can help in terms of, is 3% the right way to do it? I don't know. That's not my area. I mean, I just think some of these businesses have 90%, not 90, but 80% operating margin. 3% is really not 36% effective tax rate. Let's put it that way. So, we need to do the work, and we need to sit around the table to do something that makes sense, because otherwise, I think Europe, and I think national governments, it's in all the newspapers today, needs to work on this. But until we figure this out, the UK is working on this, Italy, France, Spain, because they're realizing that every year that goes by, these are hundreds of millions or even billions that are being, arriving in the wrong place. I'm not saying that there is no taxation on these companies. They're just paying in a place where they're not producing either the benefits or the profits, right? And so this is what we need to fix. Again, it's not about platforms. It's not about, it just happens these are the ones that, have an easier way of managing their, let's say, their tax efficiency because of the new business model. And again, we've gone through this for years for regular companies. There used to be headquarters in Delaware, headquarters in the US, I think, and correct me, have some Americans know about this, there was, the mail order companies had a loophole which was then closed, and this was fixed within the United States. It's not fixed at other levels, and this is something which I think we all need to work on.
So I want to come to Imran in a second and to sort of understand open banking and the implications of it. But let me just do my small bit for male kind. Let me see if I understood and listened properly to the example on Admiral, right? So if I understood it correctly, Anna, what you were saying about the example with Admiral was that Admiral was seeking to provide a financial service. It was doing so on the back of data provided by a platform. That platform barred it from doing so on the basis of its own privacy rules. But if the roles were reversed, if, let's say, a platform had come to a large financial institution and asked for the financial institution's data, the financial institution would have had no choice but to hand over that data.
That is exactly correct.
So,
and what I'm saying is that if I have the data that you, James, give me when I provide you a banking service where you're using a debit or credit card from Santander, we know where you buy things, and that allows me to give you a better pricing when you ask for a loan. Mm-hmm. Now, if I could combine that data with the big platform data, I could give you an even better price. I cannot do that. Mm-hmm. Whereas the big platform companies can ask you, James, do you want Santander to give me your data? I have to give it to them. This is totally asymmetrical. And honestly, this, I don't know why this, this doesn't make any sense, because it gives a huge advantage. You can have access to much more data if you're a big platform than if you're a bank today in Europe. And so I think we should have the same obligations and the same rights. Doesn't matter who you are. That's what I'm saying.
So Imran, it's an angle on which to tee up open banking. Will you just explain a little to us about where you think we are with open banking, but particularly that idea that it's been designed to disadvantage incumbents and to advantage innovators and insurgents?
Okay. Well, I'm going to start by saying that I'm probably going to disappoint Anna in the sense that a lot of what she's saying I actually agree with. So, but for those that, not everything. But for those in the audience that don't know what open banking is, I think it's just worth just spending 20 seconds on that, because otherwise we'll get horribly confused. And yes, Santander does have a fantastic digital bank called Open Bank. That has nothing to do with open banking here, as I'm describing it, which has got very much a UK lens, but it is a European-wide thing. And in fact, actually, inevitable from a global perspective. And I'll talk about that should we have the time. So, James, great introduction to me. Fundamentally, I'm responsible for delivering open banking in the UK. What is open banking in the UK? Well, it's a secure technology that allows a consumer or small business to share their data that's held by the bank, so financial transaction data, with an authorized third party. They can also instruct that third party to make a payment from their bank. So that's what open banking is. There isn't a single consumer alive that would understand what I've just said, But frankly, any consumer that's ever stepped out of an Uber or used Amazon One-Click, or in fact used one of the many aggregator platforms, of which 10% in the US currently do and 2 million people in the UK do, will know precisely what I'm talking about. But what we're doing in open banking is we're very much creating a secure technology that allows that to happen. We're enabling it only to work with very explicit consent, so the consumer has to be well informed as to what they're doing, and provide that consent directly to the authorized third party, and then port it from the bank. In the UK, what we're doing is we're building very much on something called PSD2, that's the Payment Services Directive, and GDPR, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. And in March of next year, I would say that we will have a product that will work well for consumers. We already have a product out in the market that is secure, but one that's actually got a great customer journey. And that will be available in March, covering 90% of the UK market, consumers and small businesses. And the most important thing about this is it's with a single API. And this point around standards, so a single standard API is fundamentally important. One of the things that we talked about earlier on was network benefits. And actually, what standards do is they don't just allow the data to be ported, which is great, because that can break down the monopoly that many of these networks have. But if they're done correctly, they actually can make the data interoperable. So you can move it between different players. And that's something that we're building right into the very core of what we're doing in financial services. I just want to say a moment, if I can, about reciprocity. I do think that's fundamentally important. The reason why we're doing this in the UK and starting with banks, and I think it's all about starting with banks, is that there are, I think, two fundamental observations which are no longer really debated, at least in the UK. Observation number one is that the data genuinely has value. And the data that is held by the financial institution belongs to the customer and to not the financial institution. So what we're doing in open banking is we're allowing customers to take back control of their data. And then the second point is that we've got many, many, many problems in the financial services sector in the UK. And that's not specific just to the UK. That applies to many, many different countries. They're all slightly nuanced, but in the UK we've got 2 million people who charge too much for overdrafts, 2 million people who are getting a bad deal on savings, 4 million people on debt repayment plans that don't work. We've got 5 million SMEs that can't get access to credit. We've got 12 million people who are on the wrong financial services products. It's, frankly, a bit of a mess. And it's been a mess pre-crisis and post-crisis. One of the things that is so interesting, I find, is that 47% of consumers in the UK live hand to mouth. They neither have any savings and they don't have any debt. They're frankly impossible to make money out of, but they still need financial services. And open banking can support a lot of those things. Can I just make one
No, you can't. Jimmy, can you just come one? Jimmy, I'm going to come to you in 1 second.
But it's fine.
No, the reason I want to do is I want to just, because I think you set out open banking, but there are two big questions for those people who follow it, and there's a room with a depth of expertise here. There are two questions I think that people have. One is a will it work question. Right, that actually, are the systems operational? Are they landing liabilities with the banks and giving opportunities to fintech and innovators? And the second is there, for all the talk of reciprocity, something fundamentally uneven about it, in the sense that it essentially says, look, banks, if an individual customer wants to work with a new provider of services and gives their consent, the banks just have to hand over that data, and with it, potentially, the relationships that they've built up over a long period of time. So I just wanted to sort of put to you the queries and concerns people have about whether it's operational and, to an extent, whether it's fair.
It will work. There's an MVP that was produced on the 13th of January this year, and that shows that it's secure and it works. The customer journey is very poor, and that customer journey will get fixed in March of this year. So I'm highly confident that it will work. With regard to the reciprocity point, the fundamental principle is it's the customer's data. So we're not talking about all the data the bank holds on the customer. We're just talking about the data the customer's provided to the bank and the data that has been generated by the customer's activity with the bank. Credit scores, insight, all that kind of stuff, that's the bank's IP. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about the basic data. And if they want to share it with a third party, they should be able to. My message to the banks is a simple one, is stop thinking about this as a compliance exercise. Stop thinking about this as an existential threat. Embrace it, recognize these fundamental principles, and then actually figure out how the pie gets bigger. Figure out how you can work on the side of the consumer and actually help them navigate this very, very complicated world. Because open banking is the start. Right? GDPR, principle of portability, applies to all data, all sectors. It applies to Facebook. And it embeds things such as explicit consent and the ability to revoke the consent. These are great things. We built them into the very heart of the API infrastructure. We built standards around it. Let's get it in other industries. Let's help banks get on the side of consumers, become companion banks, and help them with all the other regulated industries, all the other rent-seeking industries that they have problems with. I think that consumers will trust banks. They already trust banks a great deal, and actually that's a great leverage point for them.
Jimmy, the point that Imran makes was the really significant one about a single API and a mechanism that enables everyone to, in effect, own their own data. That is a big change. Explain to us what you think is happening or what could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really complicated area. So I'm massively in favor of open APIs, of standards, of reciprocity. Makes complete sense to me. I think one of the concerns that people have about the monopoly aspect of certain platforms are at least lessened a little bit if those platforms are required to allow consumers in a convenient and standardized way to extract their data. So right now, if I decide, and a bunch of my friends decide, we don't like Facebook anymore, we want to move somewhere else, well, all my photos are there, all of my connections are there. It's really non-trivial to move. The ability to export that data can be, really game-changing in terms of having a competitive field of play. At the same time, a lot of the concerns that people have about things like Cambridge Analytica and data that gets loose in various ways come through this sort of sharing of data in a way that consumers will, I would say, you would probably agree with this, consumers will, for a very trivial amount of service, give away their banking data, right? Maybe banking data they're a little nervous about, but they certainly give up their privacy in all kinds of ways. And as a society, we are worried about what does it mean if people agree, they click yes on share all my data with some dodgy quiz app, and then the dodgy quiz app actually is feeding the destruction of democracy because they're now tracking everything everyone's doing through this dodgy quiz app. These are the kind of concerns that people have that give me a little bit of pause, even though I believe it's actually a fundamental right of people. If you want to share your data with, if I want to share my Facebook data with my bank because it's going to get me a better mortgage deal, or if I want to share my banking data with whoever, it's my data. I should be able to do that. But there is a concern that people are not necessarily ready or understand all the implications of what that kind of sharing may mean.
Can I just ask one thing about that? I mean, Alejandro asked at the start, who are you going to trust more, with your data, a tech company or a bank? And a lot of people would say neither, right? One of the questions with data is actually whether or not people understand what's being done in their names, indeed what's being done with their consent. And Jimmy, given the experience of Wikipedia, how do you make sure that people genuinely understand what they're signing up for, how the systems work?
Well, it's non-trivial because the systems are very, very complicated. And this is it's a big educational issue, but it's also a big issue of the structures that we put into place. Last night at dinner, you made a little joke about finally understanding how Europe works, and well, you're 2 steps ahead of me, and I've read every single Wikipedia entry about it. I still don't understand it. So we build these institutions or these mechanisms that are incredibly complicated, and to explain that to consumers and to expect from a consumer perspective all I really want to do is spend my money somewhere, am I really expected to understand the intricacies of the data sharing arrangements and legalities and so on? Hopefully not, right? That's not really a plausible thing to have.
I'm going to come, John Hope, to you in 1 minute, but I just want to put to you, Anna, I guess the theme that both Imran and Jimmy are talking about is about a fundamental change in the ownership of data. And the truth is that the banking system, one of its great strengths has been that it is an owner of data, and that ownership is quite concentrated. And to a certain extent, what open banking is doing what people are asking for as regards Facebook and Amazon and Apple and Google too, which is to say, we need to decentralize data. We need the individual to be able to have the ownership of it. And if that's awkward for the big tech giants and it's awkward for the big banks, well, so be it. Isn't that fundamentally what open banking is doing? It's giving more power to the individual and taking some away from institutions.
So I'd like to say 2 points on that, and I'd also like to link that to what Imran said. I am 100% in favor of open banking, 100% in favor of individuals owning the data. However, and you made a very subtle point, which is hugely important, timing is everything in business and life. The way open banking is being set up is a fundamental risk to the business model of banks, because it's giving a lot of time, we don't know how much, to these big, huge platform companies. They're mostly Chinese and American. They're all doing business here, but it's nothing against America. It's just a question of timing, where they can really, put a lot of banks, depending how they play this, of course. So this is super important. It has to be reciprocal from the day one, because if you said we start with banks and we'll go to others. And the reason for that, and that comes to my second point, is that business models of banks have always been about data and technology. Now, every single company, car makers and others, are now understanding this. So data is becoming the most critical asset any company has is data. For banks, this has been the case for generations. When Santander talks about loyalty strategy, it means a fundamental thing. It means, Imran, if I ask you who is your bank, you answer Santander. You always deal with 3 or 4 banks. And this is the third point, which is banks today are very open. You can take your account easily. So the devil is in the detail. So GDPR, yes, it's being interpreted like so wide. So effectively, GDPR is being applied to us in a very different way to the big platforms. And this is a huge risk, a huge asymmetry, and it's not fair. And this is what we need to understand together. How do we make sure that when you launch open banking, it's possibly not possible, but as soon as possible, you make this reciprocal and fair? Because you're going to end up banking, not with banks in a few years, but with companies that today are not regulated, not supervised. Some of the things that were mentioned now on data breaches, you want data to be secure, you want data to be accessible easily to the individual. You can be sure that's going to happen today with banks.
Imran, do you want to come back on that?
If I may.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you.
So do something about it.
I can only do one industry at a time. I think there's one very important point is that under open banking, under PSD2, the data flows to authorized entities. Now, that's different from GDPR. GDPR, you can send your information, you can port it to any other company, and then they fall under the GDPR requirements. But that's very different. In banking, what we've got is, whether it's a fintech, another bank, or if it's Tencent, or whoever wants to come in, then they're going to have to get themselves authorized, which means that they have to have the financial services regulator in each individual country is going to ensure they've got the appropriate solvency, they've got the appropriate risk measures and controls and cybersecurity protections in place. So that's a good thing. The other thing that I would say is I'm very fortunate in the UK to actually see the pipeline coming through in the ecosystem. And at the moment, we've got 200 fintechs in the pipeline. Not a huge amount, but a really good amount. And they've all got fantastic new ideas, innovations that they want to bring to the market. Some of those fintechs are offering open banking as a service, and they're going to apply it to other fintechs. I don't have any big tech firms. I do actually think that the perceived risk of big tech coming into financial services is actually higher than it really is. I think that's another topic. It could well change, but I don't see that happening just yet. In terms of reciprocity, in terms of other sectors, I agree with you. We have to get on with that. Timing is critically important. What governments want to see is open banking delivered well, executed well, implemented well, and they are just on the verge, I think, of moving into other sectors. They just need to get a little bit of support that what they're doing is actually going to work, to your point before. And you know, just in the UK, we've just had a super complaint that's been delivered on the doorstep of the Competition Markets Authority that looks at 8 other regulated industries and has quantified what they call a loyalty penalty. Right. And if that isn't an argument for creating standard APIs to open up the data for all those industries, I don't know what.
Sorry, Imran, I just want to ask, because there's a question from Camila Marinho, which is actually a really constructive question. It says, if we are, I'm presuming as a bank, if we are somehow forced to submit our customers' information if asked for it, how do you think we could do that in a more, quote-unquote, responsible way? So if you sort of take as face value what you said, which is embrace it, don't treat it as compliance, if you were to do that, how could the banks, how could Santander or any of the other banks do it in a way that you would think, oh, this is more responsible, it's more helpful?
Do you know what? I think the way they should need to do that is by working within the framework that is provided to them by a single standard. Because the single standard essentially gives all parties in the ecosystem confidence that proper consent has been provided for, that the customer is properly informed, that there is a liability framework, that the APIs work, and you're going to get good quality data coming out to the other side. And critically, if the customer wants to revoke permission, they can either do it bank side or they can do it third-party side. So, you know, we're not naive. We have thought about a lot about what kind of architecture is required to make sure this is secure and it works. And I would say that's the way to do it.
Right. Can I just say,
yes, go. Yeah, go.
Very short. No, just 2 points. One, if data is an asset and we're giving that asset away to others, shouldn't we charge for it? First question, because every time I have to go to my database, my costs go up. So my investors, I have some of them here, they say, why don't you invest in digital, your costs are not coming down? Well, answer is very easy, because I have already in Spain, we've been doing this for years. We don't have open banking, but we have a lot of fintechs that are aggregators. Every time they ask me for data, I have to go. It's putting my costs way up. And the second thing is, you said open banking, you don't have a queue of the big techs. You know why? Because if you ask one of these platforms what they think banking is, they will say, oh, that is taking deposit and making loans. Well, banking is a lot more than that. So they're never going to do the regulated stuff, because that has huge capital compliance. They're going to do the non-regulated stuff, which was I was referring to, which is payments. So if I am now getting competition on all my payments in general and services, and they're doing that already. They don't need to apply for open banking to do some of the things I'm describing. This is the big problem, is that they're going for the payments. Santander has launched OnePay FX, which is basically offering you as a consumer the same price. I hope I'm right, because things change every day. Last time I checked, you can do FX transfers real time between the UK and continental Europe. You can actually do Poland, Brazil, Chile, through Santander, same cost as TransferWise. You know, this is my business, and this is not just TransferWise, this is everybody in the sort of big company space that is coming to do that. And that is the reason why we need to really think about what is real reciprocity. The devil is in the detail and in timing. And this is super important, by the way.
And I just need to warn you, and I need to warn everyone here. This was the easy subject. Right. We're now getting to the really difficult ones. So I wanted to turn to John Hope and have your apps at the ready, because there's a question that we're going to ask all of you. But I wanted to start, John Hope, with you. When we think about responsibility and we think about disruption and we think about the politics we're seeing, the subject that's been close to your heart for decades now, the subject of inclusion, you've deliberately worked with financial institutions. When you think about what is the agent for transforming the issue of exclusion, the issue of inequality, what do you think is the role of the financial services industry, and how can it work to change the story on inclusion?
First of all, hello. I'm actually talking to you. Hello. The reason I say that is we've lost some of the texture in our society. We're not really having a conversation with each other. We're talking past each other, not with each other. This is social media. This texture, this is what gets customer acquisition. this connectivity. So let me stop by saying something which maybe you already know. This guy here has changed the world with Wikipedia, and we should give him some appreciation for what he's done in founding Wikipedia. As important as what Steve Jobs did with Apple. And on that point, keep in mind that Apple, yes, a technology company, but that was Wozniak, who almost nobody knows. The guy that everybody gives credit to it is a guy who's really an okay programmer, Steve Jobs, and went to design school. He got the emotion of the product. So you felt a certain way when you picked up that Apple product. Banking has come from a very emotional place. It's about building community, building stakeholders, building entrepreneurs, building a small business into a large one. I couldn't have done what I've done without banking. My guess is Jimmy couldn't have done what he has achieved without a banker who believed in what he was doing. The guy who made this suit that I'm wearing that we put in business couldn't have done without we believing, getting his credit score up and getting him a little seed capital. He's now doing $1.6 million a year on a $35,000 loan. I think that you cannot have a stable democracy or democracies in the world without banking. I think that what democracy was, the right to vote in the 20th century, financial inclusion is, and the language of money is for the 21st century. And we need to stop thinking about disruption as a dirty word. I'm basically a positive disruptor. And I'm using positive disruption to build trust. So when you're being run out of town, get in front of the crowd and make it like a parade. I'll wait for you to get that. Don't see it as a negative. Turn it around and see it as a positive. So, example. I couldn't get my message out, and I can only do but so many of these presentations. So 2 years ago, I went to Facebook. I had 800 likes, nothing. Now I have 1 million followers, almost 100 million video views, 100 million video views. I have a dozen videos over 1 million views, and one that's like 15 million views. And it's just me, nothing, no fancy technology, this thing, and talking directly to people and inspiring them to take their life back, and then pouring that in as a business development tool into my technology, my Hope Inside locations, which are located inside of bank branches mostly. I have 50 banks, mostly in the US, who have adopted this. And that's creating customer acquisition. But that alone is not enough. That technology is not enough. We have to lean in, and I think Anna is really pioneering this space. We have Scott from the US, from Santander in the audience, who's also pioneering this space. We leaned in to get the credit score up. Those in the UK would know more so what I'm talking about. I guess getting them off the blacklist is what some of you would refer to in most countries. Getting people off that blacklist, that list where you can't get a loan. But getting that credit score up 100 points is a game changer, because most people in the world, the bank is forced to say no because you don't qualify. So my job is sort of a private banker for the working class.
But can I, and John, can I ask you, because the question I'm going to ask on the app is actually a really simple one, which is whether or not we think that technology companies or banks are going to do more to address the problem of financial inclusion. And I just...
Neither. Because it's never been the case. There was 100 automobile manufacturers in 1901. 100.
Yeah.
We only obsess about one. Henry Ford. Ford Motor Company. Why? Because they took the innovation, the technology. We've had a defensive conversation basically for like 40 minutes. He took this technology, flipped the automobile manufacturing, and paid his workers enough to buy the automobiles that they were making, inspired them to create a middle class and to create a consumer base. He inspired them with a business model and a culture. Steve Jobs inspired people. What he's done with Wikipedia has inspired people. What I'm saying is, it's about human development, backed by banking and technology, not about banking. No one says, ooh, I want a mortgage. Ooh, I can't wait to get a car loan. Ooh, my God. They want a cool car. They want to become a homeowner. They want to become a small business owner. the tail is wagging the dog in this conversation.
No, but
Go ahead.
Sorry, John, the reason I'm asking is, look, what you've done, I mean, you're very nice about Jimmy, he's awesome, but what you've done is also amazing, right? And everyone's being very nice, it's lovely. But what you've done with Operation Hope is extraordinary, because one of the big things that we look at, and when we worry about the system of global capitalism, is we worry about its systemic injustices. Right. And there is a concern about systemic injustice in the financial system, right? Yes. The exclusion of people by economic background, by race, by gender, and by age, and we're beginning to worry about those systemic injustices, not as delivered by banks, but also as delivered by algorithms. That you're starting to see kinds of exclusion in both sides. And so the reason people look to you,
if we don't correct it. Go ahead.
Exactly. And the reason people look to you is that you really have wrapped your head around this question of how do you take institutions and help them fix those systemic injustices. And so I really am interested to know, when you look at a financial institution and you look at a tech giant, how you think about making either or both deal with that issue of inclusion.
And so I've not been a good communicator.
You're pretty good. Not your biggest problem. It's a self-help session up here. Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is no different than we should have, as a society, put our economy inside of our culture, but instead we put our culture inside of our economy.
Right.
We're also talking about technology when you're dealing with human beings. And all I'm trying to say with my model of Operation Hope, where I've gone as an entrepreneur into banking, and now I'm in 40 banks, plus Delta Airlines, plus UPS, plus Whole Foods, plus Hyatt Hotels, hopefully soon Santander, and we are, and we have gotten the bank.
You already sold that to us. That's
thank you.
Okay.
and we are getting the bank out of the no business and back into the yes business by getting the credit score up. But really, we're changing the culture. We're really returning banking to its roots of community banking, just at scale. Right. And so when SunTrust Banks orders 200 locations from me, and they only have 1,600 locations, that's not community affairs, that's not public affairs or compliance, that's business. And what I've done is I've infected them with a cultural transformation in the way they look at their business, and now they got 5 million new clients they didn't have 2 years ago, because they have now adopted a new theory of lighting the way to financial well-being, which spoke to somebody's aspiration, and they poured that into a technological innovation, and yes, an app that then captures them. It's the person first, and then the technology, not the technology and the person. And so you can obsess all you want about everything we're talking about here, but until you inspire somebody that they can trust you with their lives and their aspirations and their future, you're all just rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic. The ship is sinking and we're picking drapes. People have got to believe, and here's my thing, most wealth in the world came from poor people. Think about that. Walmart was Sam Walton with a pickup truck and a storefront and a high school education. Steve Jobs was the son of a Syrian immigrant and was given away, passed around from family to family. You can go back as far as you want. Most big businesses want small ones. Who banked them? A banker. Yeah. Who backed them? A banker and a financier who then believed in what they were doing. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. The technology, the internet is what the TV was, which is what the radio was, which was what was Morse code before that. It's a different way of communicating with people, and it's extremely important. We're hearing this conversation. You got to get the architecture right, but you have got to ultimately capture the customer. And what I'm saying is, my job's real easy because nobody's focusing on what I'm focusing on. I've got 5 billion future customers that almost no one's paying attention to, and 1 billion of them are like low-hanging fruit that are just that far from being qualified to be financed by everybody in here, but almost no one is giving them any attention.
Okay, well, that's a brilliant point. Anna, 1 second, because I want to make sure.
He directly answered the question, but he's saying it's more banks than big tech that would do that.
No. So could I just say, by the way, have
yes. Because it's
Yes.
a personal relationship.
Yeah, it's banks, absolutely.
Yeah, so let's say it. Because
This is what
Banks can change the world.
Thank you.
If you ever want to
And
know,
can be a noble profession.
ladies and gentlemen, if you ever want to know what leading the witness looks like, this, I'm afraid, is what it is. And unfortunately, it wasn't just John Hope and me; it's all of you, because I want to make sure that we're trying as far as possible to hear what you say. Let's give it another go on this app. One moment. I'd just like to see. You've got a question,
Hold on, James.
Yeah.
We've had a pitch for one side.
Yeah.
Just for fun, I'm going to take the other side.
No, hold on,
No?
Tony. Can we, just because someone's done
All
a lot
right.
of work. Someone's done a lot of work on trying to make sure
All right,
that we
vote
get an app
first,
that
and then I'll
works.
tell you why you're
and
wrong.
so we can hear from everyone. And then I'll come back to you, I promise. And then I'll come back to you, and you can forget lunch. We're going to be here for hours. So the question that we wanted to put to you was the question I put originally to John Hope, which is, which do you think will be better for financial inclusion, banks or technology companies? We now know what Anna thinks, and we know what John Hope thinks. We'd love to know what you think. So let's see whether we can use the system. We've got, I'll give ourselves half a minute to answer the question. Please fire up the app and let me know what you
It's a blend of the two.
what you think.
Yeah, I see the Silicon Valley is not the right.
I'm going to give you half a minute just to answer it.
Of course, you know, Silicon Valley is going to help.
Which is more likely to improve economic inclusion, banks or Silicon Valley? I think we're keeping a more mysterious reveal this time. Has everyone had a chance to answer? It's not working. Ladies and gentlemen, I deeply apologize for the fact it's not working. It means that we have to go to our default answer, which is Anna's. It's banks. Okay, there you are. No, hold on, John. Let me just get Jimmy. So, Jimmy, you want
A combination of both.
Hold
Go
on,
ahead.
Jimmy.
Yeah, I was just going to make the point. I mean, this is pulling back a little bit to the previous question, this question of data and financial inclusion, the ability to get a customer who is on the cusp, and they might not be a customer in the olden days, but now because we can know more about them, you can actually more safely lend them money, or you can take their deposit, or you can sell them a product. Those people who are currently unbanked are more likely to come to banking through their social media accounts, or through Amazon, or through some other route than walking into a branch and saying, I want to get a loan. And so that, I don't have a strong position on either side of the question, but I wanted to say that there actually is, when we think about the way society is moving forward, increasingly digital, people are living their lives online in new ways, and to the extent, and it may be partly because if banks are being hampered by this asymmetry, that they're not able to engage in the same way in that space as the big platforms or by innovators who are working with the big platforms, then we may see, you know, the rise of some very interesting new competitors that come from the, say, tech side.
So just explain to me, what do you think they would look like?
If I knew, I'd build one.
Fair point. Yeah, and I wanted to ask you a question, because we have a question.
Can I just make a very short comment on this topic?
Go for it.
Please. I am not against big tech. I am not against tech. I'm not against digital. I'm all for technology, big, small, and medium. It helps everybody. All I'm saying is reciprocity at the same time. That's all I'm saying. Same rules on capital if we do payments. One second. Let me just give you a tiny example, because it's easier to visualize. I shared this last night somewhere. So algorithms and people, you know. So we're doing a lot of microfinance, a lot of microcredit. We've given 200,000 people small loans in Brazil. And we're doing it with a combination of people and algorithms. And, you know, and I was in Mexico City. I know he's the actor in Santiago Tianguistenco. We launched Tuillo, which is small, very specific branches in disadvantaged communities where we're giving lots of loans. We've given 17,000 small loans, but we also do payments. And the most interesting thing of this visit with this lady called Elsa in this small village near Toluca, I didn't ask her, unprompted. She went back in the back. We give loans to groups of people. This was the leader called Elsa. She comes back with a debit card from Santander. She tells me, thanks to this card, I can now pay my suppliers and get paid from my customers through the card in your ATMs. And I'm saving 4 hours a day. I don't have to drive into Mexico City and back. So algorithms plus personal relationships.
Yes,
we have 100,000 people talking to people. So I think,
I'll give it to you next. But,
someday maybe it will be through Facebook, but today we're making a real difference to thousands of people.
So when John talked about going back to the roots of banking, community banking, of a banker understanding and knowing customers in quite a personal way, using technology, I think this is incredibly powerful. So when I think about, as he was speaking about that, I always talk about, I love Amazon. I use Amazon. I buy more stuff from Amazon than I probably should. But one of the things I love about Amazon is, if you go back 50 years ago, I would have been a book customer who went to my corner bookshop, and the owner of the bookshop would have gotten to know me and know what books I like, and would have said, hey, Jimmy, I know you've been reading those World War II books. There's a new one that's come in. I think you're going to like this book. Now, Amazon does that for me, and that's part of the reason I love Amazon. They recommend things to me, and I'm like, that's actually a really good idea. I should buy that. I should read that. And so they have, the digital world of algorithms does have that ability, at least in theory, to give a really personalized service, and that's really important. And I do think that the platforms initially, and this is what you've been talking about, they have a head start on that. They've got all that data. They're already understanding their customers. Amazon knows far more about me than my bank does. I'm pretty sure. And I guess my bank knows a lot about
I'll make this very brief. I know you find it hard to believe. I'll make it brief. We're all saying the same thing in a different way. Look, technology will lead transactions, period. But people will lead transformation. It has been that way since the beginning of time. I didn't come here because your app said, come to Spain to a conference, Jan. I came because I believe in Anna. That's why I came here, because I trust her. And when you're dealing with underserved communities, they believe none of what they hear and half of what they see.
And did you met me? And you met me in person.
Yes.
You didn't meet me digitally.
That's right. They believe none of what they hear.
Very
You'd be impressive digitally, too. But yeah, they believe none of what they hear and half of what they see. And with all due respect, bankers and financiers, you are crappy marketers. You're wonderful people. You're really bad marketers. And technology on top of that doesn't have a soul. So without the story that she just told of what the technology did to this person's life, the whole key is that story.
Yeah.
That lady telling that story and that little 3-minute vignette on your video, on your website, the testimonials will bring other people in to trust you, and then you can use technology to scale those stories up to create a customer base. Look, if I created a $100 million company, it's a $70 million company now, but I'll be $100 million by January. I was zero in assets last June. It was trust. It was in real estate. Promise Homes Company, another one of my companies. I went from zero June of 2017 to $70 million in assets today, profitable with a double-digit return, operating honorably, with integrity, doing well and doing good. No technology. Me, trust. People say, I trust him. I trust him, thus I will do business with him. At some point, I'm now dumping that platform into technology, which allows me to be here while they're running my business. But it was the person, not the technology, that was the transformation.
And who gave you the loan to build a company? Or did it?
And who gave me the loan was a bunch of banks.
Can we do one thing in the last few minutes before we go to a break? There's one subject, I think, for all people, I'm sure, in this room, but also for billions of people around the world. Actually, one of the things that the film showed right at the start was, if there's been something that's happened this year and that people have thought about in different ways, it's been Me Too. And if you think about, what John Hope was just saying about how people actually are changing lives and how organizations and institutions can market those values, that's an enormously important part of being responsible as an individual, but I imagine too as an institution. And so, Anna, I just wanted to close this session by talking a little bit about that and about how you see your role and the role of a responsible bank in terms of fairness and fair treatment of people. How has that changed for you in the course of this year?
Wow. Okay, so, I think today, and this is something which I've only sort of realized it's important this year, is that speaking up really has the power to change. And on diversity, which is the issue that I've become more vocal on, I think the fact that you're a business leader means that you're doing this in your company, but if you actually share this, you can actually help others and inspire, hopefully, others to follow. And I think private, and I think, by the way, I think this is good for my shareholders, good for my teams. They care about this. And it also puts all of us inside the company, but also outside, to do more and to do faster. And I think, speaking up publicly was not usually what business leaders did. And I think always bearing in mind our responsibility, I'm not doing it on a personal basis, even though I really believe in it. I'm doing it as head of Santander. And I think I have an obligation and a responsibility to do this. Because I think it can accelerate positive change. That's why I did it.
And John Hope, can I just ask you? Sorry, John Hope.
No, I was just saying that Wikipedia has given people a voice.
Yeah.
It's used technology to give people a voice to tell stories all over the world.
Because I guess what I wondered is that, and perhaps we can close here. In the years that I've been a journalist, actually, particularly on social issues, on issues of, if you like, public morality, more often than not, it's been our politicians we look to give a voice to that. It feels as though something is changing, and that more and more we're looking to business people and business leaders to articulate that. You're a man, as you said, with a very large following now on Facebook. What advice would you give? There are a great number of people who have leadership roles in big and important organizations. What advice would you give on how you actually do that without slipping up?
Be yourself. The same person that you talk to your children, the same voice you talk to your children, you talk to your loved ones. Don't use 20 words when 2 will do. People can feel authenticity, and they can feel when you're not. And I think the reason that my Facebook page has exploded is it's not curated. It's not. I make mistakes. I flub words. I do videos in cars, do them in airports. But they say, you know what? He's authentic. I can trust him. That's the reason I say that people will always trump technology. And on the point of the word I just mentioned, some of you will get that. There's 2 things in the world. There's love and there's fear. And so the reason that we're all screwed up is that most of our leaders are leading by fear, because they don't have a vision. When you don't have a vision for the world, then you sell fear and you sell indecision. But I think love is the thing that really is the reason you got married, is the reason you have children. And here's the question. Doesn't everybody here want to change the world?
Yeah.
I'm talking to you. Don't you want a legacy? I'm talking to you. Don't you want a legacy?
Yes, we do.
Yes. I mean, anybody who doesn't want to answer that question is not being authentic. Are you just here to pay your bills, to pay a mortgage, to buy a car that will break down, and die? Or do you want to know the world knew you were here, that you did for something larger and more important than yourself? Yes or no?
Yes.
This is universal. I've been to 100 countries. No one ever answers anything other than that when they're comfortable. So why wouldn't you share that good news with the world? Why wouldn't you use yourself, your bank, your technology company, your position with open banking, your position with Wikipedia? Why wouldn't you use that as a force for good?
Okay, on that note, who knew when they got up this morning, looked in the diary and thought, I'm coming to the Santander International Banking Conference, it is going to be a celebration of love. That is what it's going to be. Brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break. We ran a little over, so we'll come back in about 25 minutes time. But I just wanted to say a huge and heartfelt thank you to Jimmy, to John Hope, to Imran, and to Anna. Please put your hands together. Thank you very much.